I was volunteering at Raptor Rehab, she came and put bands on our releasable birds, anything from a little screech owl I think we had, or something small, all the way up to the giant rings on a eagle whose hands were as big as mine. So that was a two-fisted job, and I was really amazed.
That was three
hands.
of us.
3 hands, had to hold the beak, hold the legs, you know, it was a big deal. Let's see. And I met Josh at work, but he was in a different, anyway, he let me come to a bird banding, and I got to actually hold a little hummingbird. It was just, and the bands are so tiny, I don't see how they do it. Okay, tonight we're going to learn the delicate process of banding hummingbirds, how and why Veronica started her journey in this wonderful profession, and be introduced to the larger hummingbird group, the projects run by other bird banders. Veronica has, let's see, I did this all in some crazy order. She's got a permit from USGS, and Missouri River Bird Observatory is sponsors her Missouri collector's permit. Josh is her SubPermittee, and he has applied for his own permit. So let us welcome Veronica and Josh.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Judy. And I have to ask, I've heard rumors that people have seen hummingbirds. Yeah. Yes? Oh, good. Good. Today I was with a few people, and we had some sightings of hummingbirds in Jeff City too. Yes, I live in Jefferson City. Okay, well, Judy has already introduced my presentation, and so I want to note that this picture is a picture of the young male rufous hummingbird that was banded in Columbia, November 15th, 2022. It was a team effort by me and Josh. I trapped it, Josh banded it. So nobody got to see any photos that were on the listserv. Here's a photo of that, and I have other photos of it in the presentation. I started working for Missouri River Bird Observatory in 2013. I was the bird bander for their grassland bird projects. And we were capturing lots of birds. We were using mist nets. We were capturing hummingbirds in the mist nets, and I learned how to extract them. I became a hummingbird bander in 2013. I have to go back 2 years that starts my journey for how I decided to become a hummingbird bander. This photo is more conservation area, and that was one of our banding sites, and there were volunteers from the Cole Camp Master Naturalist Group. You could see 2 of us have Missouri River Bird Observatory vests. Anyway, so going back to 2011, I volunteered with Missouri River Bird Observatory on their grassland projects, and that's when I first had the opportunity to start handling hummingbirds, taking them out of the mist nets. And Dana Ripper, she was a master bander, but in order to band hummingbirds, you have to have a separate permit, and she didn't have one. So we would just take the birds out of the nets, and then identify them, male or female, and then release them. That summer and then fall migration, we had our banding site at Van Meter State Park, and again, there were lots of hummingbirds there. So I got lots of experience. I learned how to band the pasturing birds, and then handle the hummingbirds. So in 2012, I worked as a field assistant from January through April in Costa Rica, and I I landed that opportunity because of my experience with Missouri River Bird Observatory, handling lots of birds, banding some birds, especially the hummingbirds, because this project was focused on hummingbirds and plants that they visit. And we were banding, they were banding just hummingbirds. My job was to extract the birds and then collect pollen samples and then on the days that we didn't band, I got to look for flowering plants and take videos of the flowering plants, and we were trying to see which plants the hummingbirds, or which hummingbird species are visiting which plants. This is a photo of a rufous-tailed hummingbird. It's the most numerous species of hummingbirds in Costa Rica. And the places, Brawley-Carrillo National Park, kind of toward the north central, that's where we had 2 remote banding sites, and then we also, one of our sites was La Selva Biological Station. Each of the 3 sites, we had 3 different visits, 9-day visits, so we had 9 trips in all. For probably about the first month and a half, I was completely overwhelmed because there were lots of species of hummingbirds. And it just took me a while to learn the species. While mostly I was taking birds out of the nets, I did eventually get to learn how to band the hummingbirds. So this is a violet saberwing, and it's one of the birds that we captured and banded in the highest elevation remote site at 2,000 meters. On the last time visit that we made to this site, the bander for the project, Augustine, he's the one who took most of these photos, he was ill, and so I ended up banding all the hummingbirds. Maria, it was Maria, her study, her doctoral research project, but her eyes weren't good enough. And back then I could do everything without even using glasses, which was hard for me to remember now. But so I ended up banding, in a week over 50 hummingbirds, and it was challenging. They use the method where they just, most passerine birds, you just hold them in your hand to band, and that's the method that we use. Because of the diversity of hummingbird species, the bands we had to measure, we had to use a tool to measure the legs of some of the species so that we got the right band size. This violet saberwing is at least twice as big as like a fiery-throated hummingbird. So it was challenging. This is a photo of a bronzy hermit, and this bird has a band on its leg, and I enlarged it over here so you can see that that's what the band looks like. It has a unique identifying number so that if the bird is recaptured or found, that this is the only bronzy hermit that will have that number band. And that's when you band a bird, that's what you hope, is that either you will recapture it or someone else will recapture it at some time. So when I left Costa Rica, and then in 2013, I was hired by Missouri River Bird Observatory, and in the meantime, I learned about a different method of banding hummingbirds, where you use a stockinette, which is just the the end of a stocking like this to gently put the hummingbird inside while you're banding it. And I actually, in the fall of 2012, I went to Kalamazoo, Michigan. There was a hummingbird bander there, Brenda Keith, and I helped out with their fall migration operation, and I observed her doing it, and it looked really, it made it, using this, it made it a lot easier, and it seemed to me safer, because the hummingbird, it's not always trying to get away from you. As with all birds, they just want to escape, which is their natural instinct. So I, over the spring and summer of 2013, I was able to get in contact with Lanny Chambers. He's a master bander out of St. Louis. I apprenticed with him, and Josh also apprenticed with Lanny. And then through Lanny, I got in contact with some trainers, Bob and Martha Sargent, and they had been banding hummingbirds and lots of other birds for decades. I went down in late July. I went down to Cooks Lake, Arkansas. Within 4 days, I had banded like 75 ruby-throated hummingbirds. It was very intense. The object is so you get that muscle memory so that you can process the bird, not just put the band on the leg, also take measurements really quick. It's safer for the bird that way. Also, part of the training was learning to make bands. A difference between hummingbird banders and other banders is that we have to make our bands. Anyway, this is a photo of me banding a hummingbird. There is a hummingbird in the little net there. I'm measuring the wing. So on the left, those are some of the tools that we use to make the bands. The bird banding laboratory sends us a sheet of aluminum with 100 bands stamped on it, and there's 10 in a row, and we have to use a shear brake to cut those, and then we have the thin line of 10 bands, and then we cut those. And the reason for that is that we can make those bands a little bit different length, like millimeters. So these are my pliers, and there's one that's 5.5 meters. 5.4 millimeters, and then it's 5.6 millimeters and 6.0. So the difference in the size is just by millimeters, but for the hummingbirds, it does make a difference. So after the training, I applied for a permit. I applied for a sub-permit through Lanny Chambers. And the first place that in late August, the first place that I banded hummingbird was Van Meter State Park. I already mentioned we did fall migration banding there. If you've never been to Van Meter State Park in the fall, it's really a unique place. They have a natural marsh there, the Missouri Natural Marsh, and around the marsh there are patches of jewelweed. It actually has both species of jewelweed, the spotted jewelweed and the pale jewelweed, which has the larger yellow flowers. And of course, it's one of the hummingbird's favorite flowers in the fall. Part of my permit was I had a project to try to look at the stopover during migration of the hummingbirds, and I would put a little dab of paint on the back of their heads and then try to recite them. Okay. So I had a permit, and my permit was to just ban ruby-throated hummingbirds. In 2015, I had the opportunity to go to West Texas for a training on western hummingbird species. This was through the hum band group, we have a listserv and we share information. And so, this area that was north of Big Bend National Park and between Fort Davis, we visited like 6 different areas to band. And we were banding rufous hummingbirds, black-chin hummingbirds, calliope hummingbirds, and just north of Big Bend, there was one area, it was a private residence that was kind of like an oasis, and there were lucifer hummingbirds. So I got to band a lucifer hummingbird, which was it was a thrill to do that. Kelly Bryan, he was the host and he was also the instructor for this training. And then there were probably at least a dozen other people who came to the training. So after that training, then I applied to get my permit updated so that I could band Western hummingbirds, and I did get that permit. So this is a map in Missouri of the places that I have banded hummingbirds. At the top is actually Lamoni, Iowa. I have a friend who lives there. So I banded a few in Iowa too. The red dots are ruby-throated hummingbirds, and the yellow dots are rufous hummingbirds. And the 3 at the top, those are Van Meter State Park, Marshall, and Arrow Rock. That's where I've done most of my hummingbird banding when I work with Missouri River Birds Observatory. And then in the center, those are the prairies south of Sedalia. And I did band during spring migration and during the breeding season and fall migration. I banded hummingbirds on Grandfather Prairie, Paintbrush Prairie, Mora Conservation Area, and then Bruce Tract, which is a little bit west of Green Ridge. Then there's the green mark is Montauk State Park, where is the place where I went to help Lanny and kind of apprentice with him. So the first rufous hummingbird that I banded was at Springfield Valley Watermill Park. It was December 20th, and there was a group doing a Christmas bird count, and they saw there was a hummingbird. Well, I was able to capture it and band it. It was an adult female. And then the second one was in Jefferson City, and an adult male. That was September 10th of 2018. And then the third one is the young male rufous hummingbird. The top left photo, that the homeowner had sent that to me, and it's a good photo. You can see how much rufous there is in the tail. You see a hummingbird with rufous in the tail is not a ruby-throated hummingbird. And these 2 photos are Josh's photos, and you can again see that tail. Since I worked with Missouri River Bird Observatory, MRBO, I'll just say, through 2017, and since then I've mostly done educational banding of hummingbirds, but I hope in the future sometime to continue some of the other banding on specific sites that I was doing. So I'm just going to go through quickly some projects that other hummingbird banders from the Hum Band group have done. I mentioned Kelly Bryan. He was the hummingbird bander in West Texas. And actually Josh also went out to learn how to band the Western hummingbirds with Kelly. He put out a paper in 2021, an occasional paper through the Texas Ornithological Society. You can access this full paper on their website, but they, over 12 years, they banded 15 different hummingbird species, and they observed 3 additional hummingbird species. And one of the birds that they banned, a rufous hummingbird that they banded in 2012, was recaptured in Chenega Bay, Alaska, and the next 2 sequential summers. So that's pretty amazing. He's got lots of information, lots of really good photos. I have a link, my last page is a link to some of these. And then the Hummingbird Research, Inc. This is a group of hummingbird banders along the Gulf states and Florida, and they focus on banding wintering hummingbirds, and that includes ruby-throated hummingbirds that stay along the Gulf Coast for the winter. They have in 2022, they posted information about several years of their banding and with results of that. They also keep a list of hummingbird banders, and my name is at the bottom there with my number. Nancy Newfield, she is in Louisiana. She's one of the group for the Hummingbird Research Group, and she sends out emails occasionally. I don't know that has she ever published anything? Anyway, I couldn't find anything, but so for the 2023-24 winter banding season, they had banded 3 green-breasted mangoes and 2 broad-billed hummingbirds, and that's a adult male broad-billed hummingbird in the photo that one of her assistants, Matthew Jack, took, and I got permission to use that. And then this another hummingbird bander in North Carolina. He's got this Hilton Pond website, and he does Operation Ruby Throat, which is providing information here in the United States, but he's made several trips he takes groups down to Central American countries. He's been to Belize, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Honduras, with the intent to find ruby-throated hummingbirds and band them, and he has. And he has banded a ruby-throated hummingbird in Costa Rica, and then the next year has recaptured it. So she's showing site fidelity, which is great, although as far as we know, none of his hummingbirds have ever been recaptured in the United States. So we don't know the hummingbirds that are here in Missouri. You know, we don't really know if they're in Mexico or all the way down to northern Canada. So just briefly, what can we learn from hummingbird banding? Information on movements and routes during migration and the winter months. I mentioned site fidelity. As with most birds that are banded, it's more likely that you'll recapture one of your own birds than somebody else's bird. Lanny Chambers gave a talk 2 nights ago, anyway, and he mentioned that he's been banding for like 20 years, and he's banded 6,000 hummingbirds, and yet he's only had 6 of his birds recaptured by somebody else, and he's only like recaptured 4 hummingbirds. So, and I've only banded like a few hundred hummingbirds. I've never had any of mine recaptured. So documenting rare vagrant species, I think Kelly's study shows that they're, like in West Texas, it's really a there's a diversity of hummingbirds there. And just being able to count the number of hummingbirds that is a site. I've gone to people's houses and they'll say they have a few, and I'll just keep handing them. It's, so you, unless you have a way to mark them, you don't know how many of them there are. The photo, this is one other hummingbird from Costa Rica, green-fronted lancebill, again in the 2,000 meter site. Nope, I got it wrong. Okay, so does any, yeah?
I'm curious about what kind of net you use to capture them. Is that a big deal? How to get them? How to get them out of the net and so forth?
Well, so when I'm out in the field, when I work with Missouri River Bird Observatory, we use the mist nets. And they are, they've got holes in them, and the idea is, for passerine birds, the idea is they fly into the net and then they drop. And there's usually like an envelope there, and you just pick up the bird. With hummingbirds, they're coming along, because we think they mostly just fly not very high off the ground, and they just go right in the net, and they're stuck there. So what I forgot to mention when I did the training, we also learn about using different methods of capturing hummingbirds, and we have traps that we can make or purchase from somebody else who makes them. Some of the traps are made of mesh. Does that answer your question?
And Veronica, and those are placed over feeders.
Yes, the feeder goes in the trap, and then the hummingbird, there's either a hole or, yeah. But you have to have a special permit in order to be able to do that.
Well, when you go to get them out and get them in your hand, what kind of problems do you have?
Problems? Well, you just have to do it very, very carefully. Yeah, you don't want to pull on their wing. Sometimes the hummingbird might kind of get the net around its head twice. So it takes a lot of practice. But I did learn how to do it safely. Haven't had any get injured, but yeah.
Last summer I was at Trail Teal State Park in the summer, and I was amazed. They had like 4 or 5 feeders, and there was like 20, 30 hummingbirds. I mean, it was amazing how many were there. So is there a group that kind of does a research?
Which state park?
Trail Teal State Park, right off the river. It was amazing. I had never seen so many hummingbirds in one spot.
I think it just depends on who's running the site. I know, it was Wappapello State Park. I was at there last summer, and same thing, there was the office, and they were just swarming. This was in the last weekend of August. I went down to Springfield, and they would be migrating. So you're getting hummingbirds that in late August.
This was like July.
Okay, yeah.
So middle of summer.
Yeah, the males start migrating in July. I didn't mention, this is a Columnea magnifica. It's one of the flowers that hummingbirds love to visit.
The hummingbirds that come to my house are very territorial, and they won't let others come. So that's different from the behavior you're describing, where they all flock together. I don't understand that.
I think, yeah, that happens during migration, or I think when there's just so many of them that whoever has the dominance just can't keep that many hummingbirds around. I think that's what it is.
Just give up.
So these are just links to those projects that I had mentioned. So Josh, he's gonna give a presentation now, and yeah.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't.
So with you've seen the videos on YouTube where you see a feeder and there's just tons of hummingbirds there. And it's a valid question, well, why are they getting along and staying together? The one theory that I've heard proposed is when it's migration time, they're a little less aggressive. So they are still aggressive and territorial, but they're a little more focused on getting fat. And also, if you watch very closely, when they fight or they chase, you typically have one bird and another bird comes in and chases one away. Now, have a feeder with 30 birds on it. One bird will still come in and typically chase one other bird away, and then 3 more will fly in. There's some sort of, we don't know the mathematical number, but there's a threshold. If you get enough birds on one feeder, it's almost like the aggressive territorialness by the real dominant bully bird you've all seen kind of becomes worthless, right? You know, because if there's maybe, you know, if you have like anywhere from 2 to 5 in a yard, one bird can still kind of dominate that one feeder and keep the other 3 or 4 away, but you hit that critical mass and it just doesn't work. And then again, during migration, they're a little less territorial. They'll still fight, but they're still focused on getting fat. And a cool observation, before I forget, that I had is, I noticed when I had in my yard when I lived here in Columbia, I had feeders out farther back, maybe going back like 50 feet. And I would put feeders close to my underhang where I would sit, and then I would put a feeder right next to me on the table. And what I observed that I thought was interesting is it was always the adult male and females, and for females, you know, it's hard to say, but you could definitely tell the adult males would take the feeders farthest in the back, farthest away from the big human. It was always the hatchier birds that would come and feed next to me. And my assumption would be is the adults, they were dominant, they were bigger, they could take those feeders that were safer, and the young ones, they had to take the risk. They didn't have a choice. If they wanted to eat, they would come in. And you know how you've seen them, well, they'll come in and see if there's something on your hat or something. I typically observed, you know, the adults will do that too. It was always the hatchier birds that were being the more curious ones and the more brave. So, now, if you took all the feeders away, I do think the adults would come closer to you because they didn't have a choice. But if they're given, you know, 2 options, you know, here's a safe feeder and here's a less safe feeder, I can protect this. I'll take this feeder. You know, you guys go get whatever you want there. So. Okay, so instead of giving you 2 of the exact same presentations, I'm going to talk about something hummingbird related, but on a little bit of a different angle. I'll start with a little bit about me, and I have been assured the torches and pitchforks are locked away, but I'm not a bander. I'm not a bird. I could probably identify maybe 10 songbirds by pictures, not by sound, and that's about it. However, I like birders. I'm becoming more of a birder as I get to interact with all of the neat birder people, and typically most hummingbird banders are birders. I'm kind of the exception. But, Josh, why are you a hummingbird bander? I just think they're really fascinating creatures. I grew up watching them, and I think they have a lot of personality. So that's why I'm a bander. So, a little bit about me. Again, I'm not a birder, but I think hummingbirds are neat. I also coach fencing with Emma at Mizzou. I work in IT while I manage people, but my background is very technical, and I'm interested in the technical side of things and how we maybe can improve banding as a whole, and specifically with hummingbirds, because I just think they're fascinating. And then also the data side of things is very interesting. So I'm going to talk about radio tracking. So Veronica did a great job of talking about, well actually, before I go into that, let me just tell you a little bit of my background. So I started 2016, 2017. I went to see Mr. Lanny Chambers' band down at Onondaga State Park and said, wow, that's really neat. And I think I went and saw him again maybe a year later, and I kind of got curious about the process of how one becomes a hummingbird bander. And it's, to put it simply, it's a lot kind of like falconry in a sense where you have to find someone who knows how to do it to teach you. There's a few places that are starting to put workshops together, but it's very much, you know, you can't just go take a class or anything like that. You find someone who knows how, they train you, you go do the aforementioned training steps that Veronica mentioned, and that's how you eventually go in to get your permit. So I got interested. I then harassed Lonnie until he agreed to teach me. I got him on the good side of his wife and had her advocate for me. And he's a great guy. He can come off as a little grumpy, but he was a great teacher. So he got me started. I also visited Kathy Hutchinson, who is in South Central Illinois. I don't have the exact number, but she has banded more hummingbirds than anyone ever. It's over 100,000 in her life. She just churns through them like a machine. I wish I had a video of her banding. It's crazy. So I would go up there to get experience, and then I ended up going to Texas to finish my training with, what's his name? Kelly Nelson, or yeah, Kelly what's his name?
Kelly Bryant.
Bryant, sorry. Yeah. With Mr. Bryant there, and he said Josh knows what he was doing. I also got to learn about black chins and how to age and sex those birds. And I got my sub-permit through Veronica right now. I need to do a few more little things, but I should be able to get my full master permit here shortly. There's kind of an expectation of you do so much for so long. My one complaint of the bureaucracy is it's not standardized. So there's no, you need to do X or Y to proceed to the next step. It's kind of, you just go do some stuff and you say, hey, can someone finalize my training? And they said yes or no, and then you go finalize your training, and then you become a sub-permit for a non-specified amount of time, and then you finally say, hey, can I become a master permit, get a master permit, and then finally they say yes. And my preference would be is they're a little more like, well, you need to ban X number of birds, you need to do X projects to satisfaction. So the process is a little not as well defined as it should be. So that's how I got where I am today. The projects I've done are, I'm not going to really talk about them because they're kind of boring, where I'm just doing essentially population studies. And as part of being a sub-permit and getting your master permit, you need to be working with birds, right? So I kind of picked a population study, because it wasn't the most interesting thing I wanted to do, but it was something I could do to get experience, band more birds. I'm not quite sure, I need to check with the park. Typically I do public demonstrations at the George Owen Nature Park in Independence, Missouri. And they have a migration festival in the fall that I also do banding there. If I do end up doing that, if you just want to look them up, they'll post the dates on their websites. Typically we wait until the hatchlings fledge, so there's more birds to catch, because it's kind of not much fun if I go out there and there's not a lot of birds to catch. And their site it's really cool to go out there. They put probably 50 plus feeders out, you can go walk around. However, when you are catching hummingbirds with baited traps, right? We put the traps, when we're not using mist nets, we put them around the feeders, like the food source. And it actually makes it a really effective way to catch them, as long as the feeder's there. So if you go out in the forest and you hang a feeder in the trap, it may be days before you get a hummingbird. But if someone consistently has a feeder in one spot and the birds know where it is and they come to it, and then you simply just place a trap around that, it's actually really easy to catch them. However, if a house has like 10 feeders and you put a trap around one feeder, and depending on the type of trap, you've added more steps to get to the food, and they're not stupid. They're like, oh wow, this is work, and they'll go to the other feeders. So in a typical spot that's set up for catching hummingbirds, there will be a feeder that's always maintained, or feeders that the birds come to. And then you simply, let's say you've got 5 feeders up in an area, you can put traps around 1 or 2, and then you take the other feeders and you put them down. Now some birds will be like, okay, this place is no good, and they'll go fly off to another site, they have flowers or something, right? But you'll get a number of birds that come in. But in some places, they'll have feeders up at one side and the other, and then when you put the traps up, it becomes difficult to catch because all the birds are like, I'm not dealing with this, and they go to the other feeders. But you can still catch, you just don't catch as many. So, as Veronica talked about, why we do banding, why we essentially catch, tag, and release. We can learn lots of neat information. But, as she also mentioned, the recapture rate and the people recapturing your stuff is rather low. And that's because there's a lot of birds out there and not a lot of banders, and it takes time and effort to put physical bands on birds. So it'd be really cool if we could band them here and someone could catch them in South America or Mexico, and they could do vice versa, right? And it can theoretically happen. It's just, there's so many, there's millions. I think it's 24 million ruby throats last, don't quote me on that, but there's a lot of birds, right? And they have huge areas they travel. So the good thing is if you know your sample size, which we do, so we go into a population, we capture 100 birds, tag them, release them, and the next year, if we recapture some number, and then also look at the number which we captured that weren't banded, you can make a pretty good statistical evidence, or statistically based assumption of the number of birds in that area. So it's really good at estimating populations, even when you only catch a few, but you can recapture some. And then also, we do glean some information where, we do get some banded, and then, maybe they'll show up in Houston, right? But maybe that was just a one-off, right? So we lack a lot of data because the whole process is manual. Someone's got to put the band on, and then someone's got to recapture the bird and read the number, and that's just, by chance, it's low. And again, if we could get all 24 million banded, that would be great. We'd learn a lot, but that's just never going to happen. It's just physically impossible. So from my technology side, one thing I'm interested in is basically radio tracking. And that can mean a lot of things. There you go. Okay. So, should have been on the same here. So we talked about passive tracking. That's what we do now. With larger birds, especially large birds, we can put active trackers on them. We can put GPS trackers on them. That's really great. GPS trackers have a GPS receiver, a battery, and typically a cellular radio. And they can map their location at all times, and they can use the many cellular networks around and see in real time. They're fantastic. I have them on my outdoor cats. Like, I know where they are. It's great. What's the downside to them? Well, actually, that GPS antenna could be a little heavy. That cellular antennas, those components aren't very heavy at all, but the batteries are. Our battery tech with lithium batteries is pretty good, but they still have weight. And the ruby-throated hummingbird is, what, on average, non-migration weight, 3.5-ish in there. It can vary from 2.6 up to 5.4 migration, grams. That's not a big bird. And by USGS requirements, we're supposed to keep the tag weight to 1% of the bird's weight. Well, there's just not enough weight balance there for us to get a tracker on there that antenna's and a battery that could sustain it, and actually, you know, could the bird even fly with it would be the question, right? And it would be, you know, it would be so big and bulky. We can't cause harm to the birds by tracking them, even if it gives really, really good data. So we have radio tracking and active GPS tracking. And I'll back up just a second. So radio tagging or tracking is like a more rudimentary form of GPS tracking. GPS with cellular radio is as good as you get. Radio tracking is the process of putting some sort of tag on the bird that has a small battery and it emits a radio signal on various wavelengths and capacities and power levels. And what happens is you need to have antennas up that can listen for those signals. And when the bird flies by an antenna, it transmits a unique code that tells you, I'm this code and I was in this area. So compared to GPS tracking, where you can see the map exactly where everything's been, you know, it's terrible because they gotta fly by these antennas you put up, and the US is pretty big, right? But it's a huge step up from manually banding and tagging, which isn't going away, by the way. This is just methods we're looking to improve. So let's talk about the big radio tracking network, and that's SMODIS. So you can see all the little yellow dots here. Those are the actual towers that they have up that are managed, that can receive signals from a number of radio tags that are supported. And if you notice, if you look closely, they're dotting like up by the Great Lakes. And in some areas, like in Missouri, they're running a pretty solid east-west line. And the thought with these is let's get them lined up and try to catch birds as they fly through them. You know, if the bird is gonna migrate south, there's a pretty good chance they're gonna fly close to one of these towers. There's no guarantee, but we've got a shot. And they're continuing to add more. And the cool thing about MODIS is you can put your own towers up and be a collector and send data. You know, you can put a tower up, and if you've got an internet connection, even if you don't have an internet connection, you gotta go gather it, or, you know, manually upload the data. But, you know, you can put towers up and contribute to this project. So it has collaboration with Canada, Mexico, and the US, as you can see. We've got standards. So if we can tag birds with this and they fly by any towers anywhere, they're gonna go in the database. So let's go back to the tagging example. So I catch a bird here in Colombia and I release it and it flies north. Well, another bander, the four banders in you know, Minnesota, maybe they'll catch it, maybe not. There's a lot of birds out there, right? But if that bird flies north and happens to go by a tower, I will automatically know because it goes right into the database, which I can see, hey, this tag was seen at this time in this place. And again, not as good as GPS, but pretty powerful. And why would we do radio tracking over GPS? Because the components are smaller and lighter. And here I'm not advancing my slides correctly, but okay, we'll talk about, so what are some of the more challenges of radio tracking, right? So the size and weight were the main things we talked about. We've got battery life, antenna size, frequency selection, and we won't go into RF theory. But what I'm looking into doing, and I should be clear, this is a proposed project. This isn't something I haven't started yet. I'm working on this and working with other people to come up with a plan to convince the bird banding lab to let me do this along with my normal banding, is putting a radio tracker on hummingbirds. So these things are real light. How on earth are we going to get a radio tracker on a hummingbird? Well, as technology marches on, things get smaller and lighter. So these are two different types of trackers here, of different frequencies. And you can see there with your size guide, they are small. And the one on the right is for larger birds. As you can see, it's in the centimeter size there. So that tracker there, that's called a low-tech, that is incredibly small, as you can see the quarter there. And I don't have the weight handy, but it's in the micrograms. The weights are getting down low enough to where we can actually theoretically apply these trackers to hummingbirds. So this is relatively new stuff. A few people have done some tests in controlled environments where they have all the permits to actually tag the birds in captivity and see how they do with flight time. So the proposal I am doing is, I'm gonna use some of the existing data and papers out there to show that the slight extra weight is acceptable for the birds and won't cause them any harm. I'm gonna strive to show the future value in this data, so that's kind of the key summary of why would we radio track a hummingbird, is that we can learn so much about where they are and where they go, and we just have to tag a bird one time, and if it happens to fly by an antenna, we'll learn all this migration data. Now, in theory, we don't have the coverage yet to see everything, but if radio tower coverage continues to improve, you know, especially in a line, you know, imagine we can say, oh, here's your bird. It was born somewhere around Columbia, right? And in the end of September, it passed a radio tower somewhere in Texas. And then, you know, the next month it was in central Mexico. And then the next month down, you know, this is the last we saw it. And then 5-6 months later, when it migrates north, we can follow it back. So in practice, tagging one bird is never gonna fly close enough to all the towers to get that information. But if we're able to tag lots of birds, we could theoretically get some really cool overall migration. It also can be used in more localized settings. So by simply turning the receive power down on your antennas and making them more sensitive or potentially directional, you could map a more local area. So think of what they're doing with those big towers across the US. You could, you know, take 10 acres in your yard, or you could do a survey around Columbia. And if you get really decent coverage, you know, you could see where does this one hummingbird fly around in this local spot. You know, you could theoretically, you could try and box in all of Columbia. You know, that's a little ambitious, right? Or box in all of your 10 acres, right? And see the patterns and maybe learn a bit about how much does a hummingbird normally roam every day, you know, and you're not going to learn so much about which flowers or feeders he likes to visit. That's getting really, really precise. There's some stuff you could theoretically do with that, where you would put your readers really close to your feeders, and then every time because you know they're going to come to feeders for the most part, you know every time they go to a feeder. So you've got a hummingbird A, and he comes to your feeder, you know, you're going to be hummingbird A was at this feeder and a timestamp, and then he's going to leave and he's going to come back. And you get a whole bunch of data that you could build a really cool map, essentially a heat map, and see where they go and where they be and at what times, and learn a lot about them. So what I'm proposing to do, as this is new and no one has really done it with hummingbirds yet, is I want to tag only the males. So if we jump back and we look at this tracker, right, you know, that antenna's a little long. So we can clip these antennas, and due to the way radio waves work, they have optimal links for propagating the frequency they're designed to operate at. So if we, you know, if you think of, like, you know, the old car antennas that would come up and down, if it got knocked off or hit, you'd still get a radio signal, it just wouldn't be as good. It's not like it quit work. Same works with virtually any antenna, is if the antenna gets clipped or it's a little bit shorter, it's not as effective, but it still works. So since there's no way to really attach this to the bird's leg like we can with a band, it's going to need to go on the back. But the first concern is, well, that's so long, you know, it's going to stick out of the hummingbird's back to where their tails are. It could interfere with them. So we're going to have to most likely clip the antenna. That's okay. The second thing is we're not sure, and proving this is where it gets tricky, and there's solutions around it. I have a theory that antenna could interfere with a female's nesting, because she sits and she pushes her back feet when she builds that nest, and she gets in the middle. They go watch a video of it on YouTube of building a nest, right? So I'm worried that if you put that tracker on the bird's back, that antenna, it may just get caught and come off, right, or interfere, but it would have negative effects on nest building, is my theory. So to start, I only want to band males, because they don't build nests. So there's a lot less risk to the bird to show that, you know, this can work. And then what I'll start with is, as I mentioned, getting them to fly by all those towers, that's ambitious, right? I'm gonna start locally. So I'm gonna build some local radio stations in my yard, in my area. And basically it's a test. So I put the radio tracker on the male's back. I'm gonna do it when it's not a migrating bird, so we'll do it in June when I'm fairly confident the male is gonna hang around. And hopefully we see that male hanging around. And it's less about, building a box and seeing exactly where they go. And it's more about just saying, hey, we put this tracker on this bird. The question we're actually asking is, are we gonna kill it? And I don't think we are, but that's data we need to show the bird banding lab to let them continue this project. So I'm going to tag, a small number of males, and then with the local radio antennas, hopefully see that they're around. Now there are external factors. It could get hit by, it could fly into a window, it could get eaten by a cat, right? There's no guarantee that if you put the tracker on them and they all die, that they died because of the tracker. But that is unlikely, especially if we put enough on enough of them. We should be able to say, hey, we've tagged these hummingbirds, and look at this, 4 of them, they hung around, they did just fine. It had no negative effect because look, 2 months later I caught him, and this male went from 3 grams, and he's now 4.5 grams. He's a healthy migration weight. So he has survived and thrived with this tracker on him. This tracker is not gonna harm him in any great way. And I don't really have a way to question of, could it interfere with the nesting female? You'd actually need a captivity setup where they nest, which maybe like 1 or 2 of those in the US, and they're busy doing other research. My proposal to that problem is we never put radio trackers on females before nesting season. So come fall migration, when the birds are gonna migrate, that's when we wanna see where they go, right? We don't necessarily care so much where they are in the area, so you would only ever tag a female when she's getting ready to fly south. Also, these radio tags, they are small, they do have limited battery life, that's a trade-off we have to make. These don't run forever. The ones I showed you, they should run for about anywhere for 30 days if they're on all the time, or you can get about 60 days if you set them to only be on during the day. And that's what we would do, because hummingbirds don't fly around at night, they can't see well, so they're never gonna fly around by a tracker at night. So we get more battery life. But that being said, when the bird is banded with a traditional band, they have that band for life. We would want these to fall off. So I'm working with some people that have some experience, and we need to select, essentially it's gonna have to be glued to their back, we believe, or maybe some sort of harness is made. It needs to be something that will, the glue needs to deteriorate and fall off after 3 months, or, a harness or something where the material is set to deteriorate over time, and eventually they shed the harness. Because if the tracker is gonna be inactive after so long due to limitations of batteries, we don't want them to have it on them, that extra weight and unnecessary. They keep the bands for life, but the bands are much smaller in weight, they're much less obtrusive, and we know from experience from recapturing hummingbirds many years later that it doesn't have a negative effect on their lifespan. And then finally, I'm gonna leave you with a very informative hummingbird bander slide with some technical information on how to ID hummingbirds. Any questions?
Thru.
The bottom, right there.
So how tiny are their little feet that keeps the band from coming off? Is that the limiting factor when you put the bands on?
Yes, the diameter of the feet. So as you remember, Veronica had the pictures of the pliers with the hole in the middle with the sizes. So the 6 millimeter is the overall radius around the circumference of the band. So when you rolled it out, it would be 6 millimeters across. So depending on the diameter of, or the overall circumference of their leg, that's how the band is selected. It's pretty uniform across species, and it varies from gender because the females are bigger than males. But the comforting part is we always have bands that are bigger than the leg. So when we have those pliers and we close those pliers, there is no way, as long as the leg is straight, we can crush the bird's leg, right? The trick is getting a straight shot of pulling the leg up so you can get the band on there.
And their legs are a lot longer than you think they are, from just
Yes.
looking at them.
Yes. And they can't walk on their legs like other birds. They can only perch. Also, fun fact, they can do just fine with one leg. I don't know if that's the case with many other species, but this is something that comes up. I was banding and I came across a bird that had was missing a foot. And I opted not to band that bird. Now, because, as you know, hummingbirds, they eat a lot. They kind of live life on the knife edge of efficiency, because if they don't get food for, and resources, they die. They're machines, and they need lots of food. That's why they eat at your feeders so much. Because of that, when they get sick or they're having a tough time, they typically just don't make it. Where other creatures, humans especially, even without medicine, we're pretty good at working through ailments. Our bodies can last a while without food. They can't. And because of that, we typically don't catch sick birds. And I believe some songbird banders can have it a little more often, where they can catch birds that may not be well. And the point I'm getting to is, if we have a bird that we don't think is going to make it, we don't want to put a band on it, because that band is a resource. We're stressing the bird. We want to make that commitment of banding something that will provide useful data. We don't want to band, if we want to put a band on a bird that we think that's going to die 5 days later. Now again, we don't really get many hummingbirds that aren't well just because of how they function. But when I got that bird that was missing a foot, I was like, I'm not sure if this bird is, maybe it's fine now, but is it going to be able to fly south and migrate all the way back up? If I don't think it's going to make it, well, I don't want to put a band on it, right? Because that's just a waste of the resource. We've stressed the bird out. Let's not do that. And I talked with Kathy Hutchinson, the bander from Illinois I mentioned, and she said she had a female that had 1 foot, and I think she's seen it maybe 6 or 7 years in a row. So just fine. She wasn't sure, and we have no way to tell if she could actually nest missing that foot, because the way they use the feet. So she probably couldn't build a nest, but she lived just fine.
So how many birds do you need to be able to identify to be considered a birder?
You guys are the birders, you tell me.
Well, you said you weren't a birder, and so you were quantifying. I mean, how many birds?
Maybe 5.
What do you think, Veronica?
I can do a robin, a cardinal, a blue jay.
Well, he's a birder.
He's a birder.
That's
He is a
about it.
birder.
How about a black-chinned hummingbird?
Yeah, well, the hummingbirds are different. I can do hummingbirds. But I don't think, honestly, if you showed me a bunch of photos, I don't think I could show you what a sparrow is. And when you get to the calls,
I mean, it's kind of it is a serious question, because you brought up a point that's like, well, this is a group of birders. Have you ever actually thought of that? Like, yeah.
There's
What,
no
what do you think,
test.
V? You've got a
Oh, I just
question.
have another question.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Not that it's not a good question.
No, please.
But,
Are you collaborating with any other hummingbird banders?
not,
Radio tracking?
yeah, not hummingbird banders, because there aren't a lot of hummingbird banders. I forget the number. There's 4 in Missouri. And as it was explained to me, I guess there's just not a lot of money in it. So there's not that many even academics that solely focus on hummingbird banders. Like, I don't even know if the University of Kansas, with their big, ornithology department if they have any hummingbird banders, like on staff. And maybe it's just, you know, they do broader scopes and, you know, they reach out if they need someone to do some research. And we'll collaborate with, like, the universities a lot. Like, Kathy did a project where she was having feathers analyzed, not a DNA, but there's some sort of spectrum analysis they did on the feathers that could help them identify where the birds were born based on some mineral composition in the feathers. But I am collaborating with, I forget their exact titles and departments. They're academics, career academics, and one of them researches just animal movements in general, but he'll do any animal. So, you know, hummingbirds are great. And then the other one does some more specific bird research, but not hummingbirds specifically, so.
What's the current cost of like one transmitter?
It's a good question. They are around, I think they're kind of expensive, $8 to $10. And that doesn't scale well, right? Because the bands we have probably cost fractions of pennies to make because they're on stamped aluminum. And then you could build a receiver station build your own for probably $200-300. You could buy one for a little bit more. Depends on your kind of DIY computer electronic knowledge. So that's a concern. And then it's also, you know, it's the economy of scale. Like, the market for this stuff is not very big, so they don't scale up, and therefore they don't get the cost savings you get. Though you're seeing more and more of this stuff with tracking other animals. I don't remember if Bruce, you've worked with radio trackers specifically in fish?
I work with the data.
The data, yeah. But radio tracking in other animals where a GPS tracker is not practical is somewhat common. You know, with the fish, they can actually get the fish to eat it sometimes, or they can implant it under the skin of some animals and do this kind of radio tracking. On larger animals, you can simply attach it to the animal. But yeah, the radio tracker of that size, you know, on some they'll just implant it underneath. Now, when you put these devices, you know, under skin and resources, they lose range greatly. So obviously that's not plausible with a bird, right? But you could theoretically, you know, put it, you know, if it got implanted in your arm, it wouldn't hurt you. You could live with that. But your skin or any of your cells, they reduce the range that these signals are broadcast, right? So when they've implanted them into fish, right, the antennas, you know, they're strewn across the top of the water down where it's somewhat shallow, right? So they get very, very close to their targets where, and it depends on the size of the tracker and the power of the transmitter. I don't have stats off the top of my head, but like, you know, with a full-size bird, they can probably fly within half a kilometer, maybe more, maybe 1 kilometer of the tower, and it gets picked up. So, you know, obviously when you're out in the air and you have more powerful transmitters and more tuned radio receiver towers, you can pick things up farther away, which is very important with birds because there's not one flight corridor they can go down and get tracked. And one thing I need to do on my to-do list is go read some papers on how effective they are at picking up other birds, because it probably talks all about that. I'm not yet to that stage because my first goal is to just tag these locally and then see what we get. But again, we are all federally permitted, and then the bird banding laboratory, everything has to have a project. I'm not allowed to catch and tag and band hummingbirds because I think it's neat. And I don't agree with this. We can't do it for public demonstration for the sake of public demonstration. I can't say I want to do hummingbird outreach and teach everyone about these neat creatures and conservation. That's not allowed. You need a data-driven research project approved by them to do anything. Now, if part of your data-driven research project, you want to have everyone watch you do it and do a public demonstration, they're okay with that. Begrudgingly, they've accepted that's part of bird banding. But you can't do that by itself. So.
Good reason.
Do you know anything about how many calories are consumed per beat?
I do not, but, and I should have brought the numbers with me, but, the heart rate variation is intense. Do you remember off the top of your head? Put you on the spot, Veronica?
No, I have created.
Yeah, the charts, yeah.
So that, so that I don't have to remember that chart. Well, they have to eat, I think, every 20 minutes.
Yeah, so they can go, if you've ever heard the term topor before, anyone? And I don't know, can any of the birds go into topor?
I think, sparrows.
Okay, so hummingbirds are pretty big on the topor, so basically they're able to, because they're efficient machines, their metabolism and their heart rate it's insane. But if you need to eat that often during the day, how are you gonna sleep for 8 hours without starving to death? They have to have a way to slow that down, and they do that via topor. And they can do that to varying stages, so, you know, if it's a nice warm summer night, they only slow themselves down enough to be efficient, right? But if it's really cold, they'll enter into a deeper state of topor. So they don't, you know, waste those resources and they're better prepared. Now, the downside of that is the deeper they go into that topor, the longer it takes them to come back up to full capability, and then they're at risk of, you know, predators. The story I always was told, or I read about somewhere, was, you know, it was like, someone was visiting something, this was like early 1900s, and they made note how like the Native American areas, the Native American women they were visiting in the area they were in, they would occasionally see hummingbirds on the ground, and they weren't dead, and they would pick them up, put them in their bosom, and as they would eventually wake up, they'd fly away. Because they knew, they're like, yeah, these birds, they're just sleepy, and they fell off for whatever reason, and just give them some time. So if you ever like see one out in the morning, and it's on the ground or somewhere, and you know, if it's on the ground and you think it's at risk of a predator, you know, if you can take it and put it someplace maybe a little bit safer, but just leave it alone. It's most, unless it's truly dead, you know, it's most likely in topor and it's gonna wake up and get going, especially if you had a cold night. So.
You good? Any other questions? Comments? Thank you, guys. So there's snacks in the back if anybody wants to run back there and help yourself.